Today we're going to be doing Module 4, Lesson 29, and for today's lesson we're going to continue to be dividing numbers, except we are going to be looking at it as a decimal. So instead of a fraction, we're going to look at our numbers as decimals, but you can still think of it in terms of fractions if that helps you. So we're going to be doing problems like this where they break it down into units, and I'm also going to show you how to solve these in a numerical way. So this lesson should be pretty quick. We don't have too many things. All right, anyways, so for this lesson, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you how to do it in this unit form way, and then I'm also going to show you how to do it in the numerical way. So I'm going to start off by looking at this problem. So we have 7 wholes divided into 10, or divided by 1/10. Now I can also think of this problem as 7 divided by 1/10. I could think of it like that as well. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to think about these as units. And what really helps me out when I'm thinking of these units for dividing stuff by decimals, I like to think of money. So I'm going to rethink this problem as $7 divided into 0.1 or 10 cents. I'm going to think about it like that. I'm going to think about this as if I had $7 and I divided it into 10 cents, how many dimes would I have maybe? And that kind of helps me think of it a little bit better, but if this doesn't help you, that's fine. But just work along with me on this. So what I want to think about is that how many tenths are there in one whole? So in one whole, or maybe you could think of it as $1 bill, how many tenths are there or how many dimes are there? So in one whole, how many tenths are there? And if you can't remember how to do that, you could either think about, well, if I had 0.1, how many times would I have to add that? Or to get to a whole, how many times would I have to continue to multiply or add 0.1? And in this case, I would have to have 10 tenths or 10 dimes to get one whole. So then it asked me, well, then there are how many tenths in 7 wholes? So if in one whole there is 10 tenths, then in 7 wholes, I'm basically just multiplying that number by 10. So I'm taking this 7, I'm multiplying it by 10, and I'm going to get 70 tenths. And that would make sense because if I think about it, if I were to have $7 and I were to switch it all into dimes, I would have 70 dimes in my money, and that would give me 70 tenths. So the answer for this one would just be 70. So I'm going to erase this real fast. My final answer would just be 70. So if I took this number 7 and I divided it into tenths, I would get 70 tenths. And why this number is bigger than everything over here is because I'm taking a unit and I'm breaking it up into a lot of like itty bitty small pieces, and that's why this number looks so big. Now, if I were to try and do this numerically, which might be the easier way for you, what I could think about is like if I have 7 divided by 1/10. By now we know how to divide numbers or fractions. So what I would do is just like before, I can circle this fraction because that is a fraction I need to get the reciprocal of. So I'm going to do 7 times, remember that multiplication symbol changes, and then I'm going to flip-flop this so that's 10 over 1. And remember, this 7 right here also technically has a 1 underneath it. So right now I have 7 wholes times 10 wholes, which will give me 7 times 10, which gives me 70 over 1, or just 70. So those are 2 different ways that you can get the answer. So you can think of it in this unit form, you could think of it in money terms, and you could also think of it as just just solving it as a division problem, knowing the ways that we have done it so far. So keep this in mind. You might want to keep these in a notebook so you can keep track of them. And you are going to want to at least kind of know how to do this because you're going to be doing a couple problems like this part in particular in your problem set and homework sets. All right, so I'm going to erase this and move on to the next problem, which is actually pretty similar. So for this next problem, I have 7 4/10 divided by 1/10. Divided by 1/10. So my problem looks like this right now. So then what I need to do is I need to think about, well, how many, so there are blank tenths. And the reason why I have this unit tenths right here is because I'm dividing it by tenths. If I'm dividing it by tenths, I want to know how many tenths I'm going to have. So how many tenths are there in one whole? So we'll do this real fast again. So how many tenths are there in one whole? Well, one whole, we already talked about this earlier. There are 10 tenths. And then when I think about it, how many tenths are in 7 wholes now? In 7 wholes, what I need to think about, okay, well, if I have 10 tenths in one whole, then if I have 7 wholes, I just multiply that number by that 10, and I get 70 tenths. So I have 70 tenths, but I still have this 4 to worry about, and that 4 is in the tenths place. So there are, you're going to see this in your problem set and homework set a lot, where it's also going to ask you to do this, where it's going to say there are blank tenths in 4 tenths. So we're basically just taking those units. So we got 7 wholes and 4 tenths. And we're just taking those units and figuring out how many tenths are in those units, because that is what we are dividing by. So there are 70 tenths in 7 wholes, but 4 tenths, you might get kind of tripped up. You're like, oh, I'm not sure. But it's actually really simple, because in 4 tenths, I just have 4 tenths. And that's all I have to do for that problem. Now, when I have 70 tenths and 4 tenths, I now need to just add those up together. So I have 70 plus 4, and 70 plus 4 gives me 74 tenths. And that's all I have to do for this problem. So you're first going to want to remember how many tenths are in one whole. And then you have to figure out how many tenths are then in that whole number that you have. And then if you have any decimals past that, like the tenths place, then you just figure out how many tenths are in that place value. And that's all we have to do. Now, after this, I could also think about this in money terms, if that helps me. Because what I can think about is that if I have $7, how many dimes do I have for $7? Well, that would be 70 dimes. And then if I had just 40 cents, then if I just had 40 cents, then how many dimes is that? And I know that each dime is worth 10 cents. So that would just be 4 dimes. And then that would give me 74 dimes. Or you can kind of think of it as like 74 tenths. All right, now the last way that I'm going to show this to you guys is with the just the regular dividing it, finding the reciprocal. So I'm going to do 7.4 divided by, we're going to do 1/10 like this. Now I need to find the reciprocal. I'm sorry, you can't see that. I'm going to do the reciprocal. So I have 7.4 times 10 over 1. And really, you can just rewrite it as just times 10. And at this point, you should remember how to move those decimal places. So if I'm doing 7.4 times 10, I know that my decimal is moving 1 place because there's 1 0. And I know that it is moving to the right because I'm creating a bigger number because I am multiplying in this section. So then that eventually gives me 74 as well. So you have a couple of different ways to solve these problems again. All right, I'm going to get the next problem up now. So I'm going to erase this, and please make sure you're writing down these notes in your notebook, especially that unit section part, because that can get kind of tricky. But hopefully by now you're kind of seeing the pattern that is starting to happen. Usually that number you start with, like in this problem, if I start with a 7, I'm going to have 7 somewhere in my answers, just the place value is changing. So for this one, I have 7 divided by 1/100th. So now, instead of trying to figure out the tenths, I'm trying to figure out there are how many hundredths in 1 whole. So in one whole, how many hundredths are in there? Well, I know that in one whole, there are 100 hundredths. And if you've noticed, this number usually matches with this number right here. So if I have 100 in units, I should probably have 100 as a numeral right here. So 100 hundredths are in one whole. So then if I have 7 wholes, I'll write there are blank hundredths in 7 wholes. So I first like to figure out how many hundredths are in one whole. Even though it doesn't look like that's a part of my problem, it's going to help me solve other parts of it. And then I'm going to figure out, well, if I know this one, then I should probably know how many are in 7 wholes. So then I'm going to think about it as there are blank hundredths and 7 wholes. So if one whole has 100 hundredths, then 7 wholes, I could really just multiply 7 times 100, and I would get 700 hundredths. And that would be my final answer for this problem. It would just be 700. And really, you can also even think about it as when we were doing our dividing decimals way back when, at the beginning of the year. You could think about it as just, so it's a little bit different from dividing decimals at the beginning of the year, but it could help you out. And then after that, I could also think about this in money terms. So if I have $7 and I'm dividing those $7 into just pennies, like all I want to do is use pennies, then if I just want to divide these into pennies, I know that in $1 has 100 pennies. So then if I have $7, that would equal 700 pennies. And then that is another way that you can think of these answers. So remember hundredths, because $1 has 100 pennies, so the hundredths are very similar like that. And then the last way that I could do these problems is I can just do the standard algorithm. So I'm going to erase this part down here. And for the standard algorithm, I could have 7 divided by 100th. And by now you should know how to rewrite these decimals into fractions. So I have 7 divided by 100. I could then change it into 7 times 100. And remember, technically those ones are underneath both of these numbers. So then I do 7 times 100, and that gives me 700. And then that is my final answer again of 700. So 7 wholes divided into hundredths will give you 700 hundredths. All right, now we're going to move on to the next problem. We're actually almost done, but if you need any help, please let me know. So for this problem, we have 7 and 4 tenths divided by 100th. So for this one, again, I had to figure out that there are blank hundredths. And the reason I'm finding how many hundredths there are is because I'm dividing by hundredths. So there are blank hundredths in one whole. So that means that in one whole, how many hundredths do I have? Well, I have 100 hundredths. So then there are blank hundredths in 7 wholes. So if I have 7 wholes now, then I'm basically just multiplying this number by this one right here, and that gives me 700. So I do 7 times 100, which gives me 700 hundredths. But remember, I still have this part right here. So then I have to think about, well, then in tenths, so there are blank hundredths. There are blank hundredths in 1/10. And now we have to figure out this so that we can figure out what this number is supposed to be. And I will be right back. All right, so then when I'm trying to figure out how many hundredths there are in 1/10, then I just need to remember, well, if I had a bunch of hundredths and I was trying to add them up to tenths, I would need 10 of those hundredths in 1/10. So then that tells me that if there are, oops, oh my gosh, there are blank, oopsies, there are blank hundredths in 4/10. So then that tells me that then I have 4/10. If there's 10 hundredths per 1/10, then that tells me that 4/10 can just be multiplied by this 10 right here, and then 10 times 4 is 40. So right now, what I'm going to be adding up is that I have 700 hundredths plus 40 hundredths, which when I add 700 plus 40, I get 740. And that would be my final answer. Now, remember, another way you could think of it is that if you had money, so let's say you had $7.40 and you wanted to convert all of that for some reason into pennies, then you would have 740 pennies. And really, that's just kind of like taking away the decimal point at this point. So it's kind of like you just take away that decimal, and there we go. Because I know that in 7 wholes or $7, I would have 700 pennies, and that in 40 cents, I would have 40 pennies. So that'd be 740 pennies all together. Now, the last way I'm going to show you with this problem is I'm going to erase all this right here. I'm going to show you the numerical way. And for this, all I'm going to do is I have 7.4 divided by 1/100th. Like so, and then I know I need to get the reciprocal of this number right here. So now I have 7.4 times 100. Remember, they technically have the ones underneath them. And then after that, I am going to do 7.4 times 100. I should know how to move my decimal places, so I move it over 1, 2, because I'm multiplying. And again, I get 740. And then for our very last problem, again, we're going to have a very similar type of problem, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the numerical way and show you how to think about these problems. So we have 7 49/100 divided by 1/100. So now in this problem, you can think of it in money terms, which helps me out. I can think, well, in $7.49, how many pennies would be in that? And I know I'm thinking about pennies because this is in the hundredths. If it's in the tenths, you think about tens or dimes. If it's in the hundredths, you think about pennies. So since it's in the hundredths, I'm going to think about pennies. I'm going to think about, well, if I have $7.49, how many pennies is that? Well, that would be 749 pennies. So I know that 7 wholes would give me 749 cents, would give me 49 pennies. So my final answer would just be 749. Now I could also do this the numerical way, so I can have 7 49/100 divided by 1/100, and then I could have 7 49/100 multiplied by 100. And again, we should know how to move our decimals around when we're multiplying numbers. So since I have 2 zeros here, I'll move it around. I'll move it twice, and since I'm multiplying, I'll move them to the right. So I go 1, 2, and I get 749 as my final answer. So that's how we do these problems. If you're confused with the problem set, please go back over from the video or ask for help if you need it. You're going to be seeing a lot of problems where it breaks down to unit form, and then eventually the second half of your problem set will let you choose the method that you want to use and then solve like that. So for your problem set today, you're going to be working on number 1, A through F, and that's all going to be the unit form. Then you're going to do number 2, A through F, which is you can do it whichever way you choose. And then number 3 is a word problem. Then for your homework today, you're going to be doing number 1, A through F, number 2, A through F, and number 3. So the exact same problems as your problem set. Please make sure, though, that you are doing lesson 29. If you don't do lesson 29, you're not going to be doing the correct problems. We did switch again, so please make sure you're keeping track of that in your books. Or if you have any questions, please ask me, and good luck.